Meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren,
Ladies and
ganz
gentlemen,
herzlich möchte ich Sie
a
begrüßen im
very
Namen der
warm
Gesellschaft für
welcome on
christlich-jüdische
behalf of
Zusammenarbeit
the Palatinate
zu diesem
Society for
heutigen
Christian-Jewish
Symposium
Cooperation.
Jüdisches
Welcome
Leben in
to our
Landau, jüdische
symposium,
Weinhändler
Jewish Life
und
in Landau,
pfälzische
Jewish Wine
Weinkultur.
Merchants and Palatinate Wine
Wir freuen
Culture.
uns auf die
We are
übergroße
delighted
Resonanz und das
with the
breite
great
Interesse,
response
das diese
and the great
Veranstaltung
interest
gefunden
that
hat
this
bei Ihnen,
symposium has
aber auch in der
generated among
Öffentlichkeit.
you and among the
Als
public
wir
as
vor
well.
vielen Monaten begonnen haben, diese
When
Veranstaltung zu
we
planen, haben
started
wir
planning
gedacht,
this event
wenn
many months
50
ago, we thought
Dauerteilnehmer über den
if
Tag kommen,
50
sind wir
people
ganz
join,
zufrieden und
we'd
glücklich.
be
Die
happy.
Anmeldezahlen zurzeit sind knapp über
But currently,
200.
more than 200
Also
people
es zeigt das
registered.
große Interesse
It shows
und wir
that
freuen
people are
uns,
very
dass Sie da sind.
interested, and
Ich
we're
begrüße
so
auch
happy
alle,
to
die
see
unsere
all of you.
Veranstaltung
I
im
welcome
Livestream
all of you in the live stream.
Veranstaltung wird bis in die USA.
That event will be streamed all the way to the US. I also welcome the representative of the Ministry for Jewish Life and Anti-Semitism, Ms. Monika Fuhr. Ms. Fuhr, I'm so glad you joined us from Mainz. A very warm welcome to you. I would also like to welcome the Lord Mayor of our city of Landau, Dr. Dominik Geisler. Dr. Geisler, from the very beginning of your time in office, you have always made it clear, time and again, that the topic of Jews in Landau is close to your heart. It's very close to your heart. We welcome you. Thank you for coming. You have also supported and promoted the preparation for this symposium from the very beginning. I thank you for coming even though you are not quite well. We hope you recover soon, and thank you to your entire team and the city administration. I would also like to extend a warm welcome to Ms. Ruth Landau and her entire family. They have come from San Francisco, and her brother Mike has joined us from England, coming to Southern Palatinate. Ms. Landau and your family, we are very, very happy that you have come today to Landau, because Landau is the home of your family. Thank you for your participation, for helping to plan the symposium, and thank you for joining us here today. Ms. Ruth Landau is the actual initiator of the symposium. She's the grandchild of a Jewish wine merchant, Heinrich Levi. In her book, Oma Minna's Cheesecake, Recipes and the Story of Our German Jewish Heritage, she has described her family history. In this book, she frequently uses our Jewish heritage. Our means our family history, as described here, but the word our also expresses that this family story is part of Landau's city history as well. It is particularly important to remember this heritage this year, as the city of Landau is celebrating the 750th anniversary of its city right. And it's important to commemorate the Jewish part of the history as well. Downstairs, the book is available. You can look at it. And there are a few copies here, but you could also go to the bookstore Knecht during the lunch break or tonight or in the coming days. Very close, just around the corner, is Theaterstraße, and to the left you can find the bookstore Knecht, and you can find and purchase the book there. We didn't expect the book to be so popular. It's only been published for a few weeks, and it will have the second edition very soon. Miss Landy was born in Geneva, where her father Ernst, he was born in 1916 here in Landau, where Ernst worked as a UN labor law expert. And from the very beginning, Miss Landy was interested and supported Jewish life in Germany and keeping the memory, and also Jewish Christian encounters. This is at the center of her work. You can describe it with the following words: humanitarian work becomes her life's mission. One of the mediums she uses is film. The award-winning documentary Dark Circle describes the problematic connection between nuclear power and nuclear bombs. In the movie Places for the Soul, it portrays the architect Christopher Alexander and his contribution to an architecture that makes humane living possible. Her ability and willingness to communicate and engage in dialogue has taken her to all continents on behalf of UN and UNICEF. She was active worldwide for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in campaigns for health, nutrition, and protection of children. Giving a voice to others, preserving memories, bringing them back to life, fighting hate. Those are the motives and goals of her actions. Thank you for everything, Mrs. Landy. I would also like to welcome today's speakers, Mrs. Christine Kohl-Lange, Mrs. Janina Huber, Professor Dr. Andreas Lehnhardt, Dr. Ute Engelen, Mr. Felix Masko, and Dr. Christoph Krieger. Thank you. Thank you for your willingness to come to Landau and speak to us in this symposium. Before each presentation, we will introduce the speakers in detail. The presentations will also be published in a book with a certain delay, together with, in cooperation with the Institute for Palatinate History in Kaiserslautern. Its director, Dr. Sabine Klapp, has also joined us today. I would also like to extend a warm welcome to her, to Dr. Klapp. I also thank the interpreters, Ms. Lachmann and Ms. Mokla, and also thank you to the numerous sponsors. I cannot list them individually, but we have listed them in our brochure. I would like to mention the Winzergenossenschaft Deutsches Weintor. They will cater to the guests during the symposium. I welcome Mr. Frank Jenser as the chairman and Mr. Thorsten Schmidt as the chairman of the supervisory board. They are here today. A warm welcome to you both. Our event was also supported by Landeszentrale für politische Bildung, for political education. Bernhard Kukatzki should be here. I haven't seen him, but we'll look forward. He will come. We also thank the Foundation for Jewish Studies, represented by Mrs. Wiltrud Keitlinghaus. A very warm welcome to you as well. Thanks to all the sponsors. Without them, this conference would not have been possible. But you can imagine that this event is a certain financial risk for our small association. So if you want to keep supporting us, we have a few donation baskets downstairs, and you can donate. Thank you if you already have, but you could also wire transfer some money to our bank account, and we will issue donation certificates. So thank you if you financially supported this event. Thank you so much. Last but not least, a very special thanks to Mr. Bernhard Scholten. Without Bernhard Scholten, there would not be a symposium. He is a board member of our Society for Christian Jewish Cooperation, Palatinate. He has organized this symposium in a very unique way. He had numerous discussions with the city administration, with the speakers, with the sponsors. He handled all the press work, and he also maintained contact with the Landau family. Today, Bernhard Scholten will be our moderator. He will introduce the speakers and host the discussions. Thank you, Bernhard. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, remembrance is more than just collecting interesting historical facts. Remembrance interprets these facts and places them in a more comprehensive context. Historical facts thus become the basis of a story with all its ups and downs. History interprets historical facts, and with this interpretation shows the meaning of the history for the present and also for the future. In the past weeks in southern Palatinate, we had the wine harvest. Many people from many different countries worked in the vineyards. People from different cultures, countries, regions, languages, and religions. German wine growers alone could not manage and produce wine from Germany. So this grape harvest in and of itself is an image and a parable for communication and encounter, for a culture that includes others. The foreign culture cooperates and does not exclude others. But not only the production of wine is an expression of communication, the wine itself is an expression of community. In community, wine tastes better than just by itself in a room. But I heard that this is possible too, to drink wine by yourself. Just as Oma Mina's cheesecake, wine is also an expression of a culture of living, a culture of encounter, and a culture of dialogue. And at the same time, it expresses humanity and humaneness. Jewish citizens of our city of Landau played a large part in this culture, and we want to commemorate and remember this today. We also do this against the backdrop of current movements, events, and trends that are not characterized by humane living and humanity today. Remembering the success of social relationships in the past could also be an opportunity to work on making this humanity possible again in everyday life and on the global stage. So today, I hope we'll hear a lot of information, a lot of new insights, and many good encounters and discussions today. Thank you for coming. Ms. Fuhr, you have the floor for your words of greeting. Thank you so much. Good morning to all of you. Beautiful good morning to all of you. It's so great to see this many people here. It's so great to see you here. Thank you for coming. Thank you for accepting this invitation for this great symposium. Thank you, Mr. Pauli, for your warm words of greetings. I also thank you for coming, and thank you for having me today. I greet you on behalf of our minister, I think he would like to join as well, but his agenda was very full. So unfortunately, it wasn't possible for him to join, but he wishes you all the success, and he is confident that we will have a great evening and we will be very inspired. So, greetings from Alexander Schweitzer. I will limit my words of greeting to a few people only because you had wonderful words of greeting, and I don't want to top that off. And we will hear lots of presentations and more greetings. Miss Landi, it's a great honor for me that you have joined. It's a great honor that we can meet, and I welcome you and all your family members. Some of them have joined us yesterday from all the way from San Francisco. Lord Mayor Dr. Geisler, it's great to have this symposium here in this city. Thank you so much. Thank you for all your support of Jewish life. It's close to your heart, and it's close to my heart as well. And I think we have to do everything we can so that Jewish culture and Jewish life in our country are made known and that prejudices are broken down, and the symposium is part of that as well. I also thank the presenters and the presentations. I look forward to them. I can stay until lunch break, and unfortunately after that I have to leave. When Bernhard Scholten called me in August last year, and he said that the Palatinate Society for Christian-Jewish Cooperation plans a symposium on Jewish life and Jewish wine merchants and wine culture in Landau, he didn't have to say much. I immediately was convinced. And I said, it's a great idea, it's a great topic, it's part of Palatinate, and it's important, and I will do everything I can to support this symposium and to make it possible. So thank you, Bernhard Scholten. Thank you for your commitment. Thank you for your great work. It's great to see this symposium embedded in the celebration for the 750th anniversary of the city of Landau. And thus, it also focuses on the Jewish history in this city. The relevance of wine for Palatinate is certainly obvious. It's in our DNA. It's part of our DNA. And therefore, I am all the more pleased that this event brings us closer to Jewish life and the Jewish wine merchants of Landau, and showing their contribution to the development of the city and highlighting their influence on Palatinate wine culture as a whole. Miss Landi, you were one of the initiators of this idea. And last year, you talked to the Lord Mayor and to Mr. Scholten, and you said, let's do it. And without your initiative and without your commitment, this event today would not have been possible. Your grandfather, Heinrich Levi, was a wine merchant in Landau himself. And it's very touching for me that you and your family members have joined us here today. Together with you, we want to look at your family history, and you're sharing that with us. And you've done that in this wonderful book, Oma Minna's Cheesecake, translated into German. So I also thank all those that financially supported it and all the other support for this book, and also having it translated into German, almost already the second edition. That's great. Miss Landy, your family fate represents the fate of millions of people. All those who were marginalized, persecuted, imprisoned, tortured, and murdered during the Nazi regime. We owe texts to you, and you have written down your family history. Very touching. Your books are memories that will remain, also and especially for future generations. And I want to quote something from your book that impressed me very much. You said that our work is our manifesto against forgetting the history that has marked our family. We do not want to renounce this darkness, but we can remember the light. Remembering, cooking, celebrating. Our book is an invitation to do so, and that is a beautiful sentence, something beautiful that you have written down. Thank you so much. And your book is extraordinary, and I think it can be an important source for young generations to deal with the history. Because every generation anew should look at the past, at our past. And I have perceived a great interest of young people in our past, in our socialist past, and the consequences of Shoah. And here in Landau, when we come to Landau, we have to mention Max Le Vogt High School. It's called a school without racism, a school with courage. And the school is committed to fighting discrimination, and that's great. And the Stolperstein initiative of that grammar school led you to Landau, because Stolpersteine of your aunts, Ruth and Suze Levy, are there too. So we have Stolpersteine for them too. And I am deeply grateful to you for offering a piece of reconciliation for us as a city, and that you do not only associate the inhumane side of our history with Germany, but also the good sides. The Nazis took anti-Semitism to excess, but anti-Semitism is not their invention. Anti-Semitism is older, it's rampant worldwide, and it's once again on the rise, even here in this country. Mr. Pauli mentioned it. We see harrowing anti-Semitism that not only threatens Jewish life, but seeks to destroy it. In view of October 7 last year, it's a bitter truth and a bitter reality. On October the 7th, since then we have seen clearly that anti-Semitism has always been present in Germany. It was never destroyed. Unfortunately, the attack by Hamas has given rise to anti-Semitism in Rhineland-Palatinate. You see that. I hear that when I talk to Jews in our country. I personally, I'm ashamed, and it's very depressing for me to tell Jews we are worried. When they say they are worried in public, they're not wearing a kippah anymore. They're not wearing the Star of David anymore. Jewish children hide their identity in school to avoid discrimination. Community members are afraid to attend services and events at their synagogue. And they ask not to receive any mail with their community's postmark. This is by no means abstract. It's also tangibly measurable. In Rhineland-Palatinate, and I think you have to know, in 2022, there were 46 anti-Semitic incidents, and that number rose to 170 incidents. That number has more than tripled. And we should really think about it. This development is completely unacceptable, and we are all called to stand up and fight against that. The authorities is doing everything that they can to make sure that Jews are safe. It is a top priority, and I can also say that on behalf of the entire ministry, the entire government, and for me personally, it is a top priority. We have increased police protection for Jewish institutions, but I think safety and security is one thing, and it has to be guaranteed. But the other thing also is we all have to do our part. That's why this event is important. We have to break down prejudices. We have to share Jewish life. We have to share Jewish culture. Evermore, even more. It has to happen in schools. It has to happen in all means of trains and education. There's a lot that is already done, but I don't think it's enough. I think we have to increase and step up our efforts in this regard. Because we have to repeat time and again, if you attack Jewish life, you attack our society, you attack our freedom, you attack our peace, you attack social cohesion as a whole. Ladies and gentlemen, Rhineland-Palatinate has a rich Jewish history that is unparalleled. Lots of testimonies and traces of Jewish life and Jewish culture can be found all throughout the towns and villages of Rhineland-Palatinate. The international recognition of the Schum cities, Speyer, Mainz, and Worms, as a UNESCO World Heritage Site showed how internationally important that Jewish heritage is. And if you haven't visited the Schum cities, do so. Come to Speyer, Mainz, and Worms and visit them. The Schum cities represent many other towns and villages in our countries, and they also tell the sad side of the story. They tell stories of anti-Semitism, destruction, persecution, and death. It's good, and we're lucky that after the crimes against humanity of the Shoah, we once again have an active Jewish community. Jewish life and Jewish culture is important and very meaningful in our country and in our region. And this authority is the first authority that has a commissioner for Jewish life and Jewish culture. The other states followed suit. Jewish history in Rhineland-Palatinate, whether in towns or villages, is important, and keeping that history alive is important. It's part of our culture and part of our identity. And today's symposium does that in such a wonderful way because it honors the significance of Landau's Jewish history. And it brings this history to life for all of us. And it sheds light on the Jewish wine trade and the Palatinate Jewish wine culture in such a multifaceted way. I would like to express my heartfelt thanks to everyone who has made this possible. Thank you, family Levi. Thank you, Landy family, for coming. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to the future presentations. Thank you so much.
It will do. Dear Ms. Landy, dear Landy family and dear relatives. It's true, I'm infinitely grateful that you all have come to Landau. It's the city of your ancestors. And we met a few days ago at the laying of the Stolperstein for Oma Mina, and it was so touching. See you, your whole family, and knowing that your wonderful book, Oma Mina's Cheesecake, has made her, in the meantime, a well-known symbol of the Jewish life here. It's like a miracle. The book is now going into its second edition, and this is a wonderful first sign that Jewish heritage is being revived. I still have a lump in my throat when I think of the moving statements of a family made a few days ago. I have to switch now into German because I have to address the following in German. Und zwar deshalb, weil
that is because it's hard to forgive, or it's almost impossible to forgive what Germans have done to your family, to your people. We are still described as a big nation of culture, but we have committed this crime. And you were Germans, German Jews back then, but you were not recognized as Germans back then. And in the end, you were not even seen as human beings. And this is something that cannot be forgiven. This is something because I'm a descendant of grandparents who have been to war, who went to war. I don't know what they did back then. I had grandparents who just didn't talk. This generation that just didn't talk about that. When I tried to address this topic, they told me to shut down. I think they tried to forget the atrocities of war. And now we are standing here facing the horrible situation in Palestine. And this is why it's important that we come together here today to understand why Zionism has been important 140 years ago. Why was it that Theodor Herzl who propagated Zionism? Because Jewish life for centuries has been threatened. They've been persecuted for centuries. And in our city, if we walk through our wonderful city today, we see the heritage of Jewish life, of Jewish wine merchants everywhere, in the Marienring, in the Südring, in the Nordring. There are old buildings, and we've done research on that. Thank you very much to my team for your work, because without your work, without your research, I would not understand our history. So you are a big support for me as a head of the city archive. So, and also the industrial track that we've got in our city is a sign of the Jewish wine merchants that shaped the picture and the culture, the wine culture of our city. Half a year ago, I didn't know that. 1 year ago, I didn't know that. I have to admit, I did not know about the important role of Jewish wine merchants for our wine culture here in this region. You have to go out. We have to say that we in Germany have the duty to protect Jewish life, to preserve Jewish life, and to instill it with life again. And this is what we want to do with this symposium here today. And so I'm beyond grateful to Mr. Pauli, Mr. Scholten, and Dominik Emmentraut of the Society for Christian Jewish Cooperation for planning this event together with the city of Landau. And I would love to see a repetition of this event, a follow-up event on this in the next years to come. Events like that show the importance of Jewish life. It has always been important, it's still important, and it will always be important. So have a great event to all of you.
Guten Morgen. Bonjour.
Good morning.
My name is Ruth Landy, as you may have heard, and I am the granddaughter of Heinrich Levy, and I am so happy that 4 of his other grandchildren are here, and even one of his great-grandchildren, Isaac Siegel. It's truly moving for us as a family that our grandfather's story has inspired this remarkable symposium. And of course, you'll excuse me, but I do have to start with thank yous to Dr. Dominique Geisler, the Lord Mayor, whose idea this was, to Dr. Pauli and the Society for Christian-Jewish Cooperation, and to Monica Furr for her touching statements and presence, which is symbolic for all of us, I think. And of course to Mr. Bernard Schulten, who's worked so hard with us. That 9-hour time difference, he writes me, we had a lot of communication this last year, and this would not have happened without him. So the article that I wrote about our grandfather, which Dr. Geisler saw, was my attempt to solve a mystery. What world did our grandfather inhabit as a Jew in the wine trade in the 2 decades between the world wars? I knew he and his brother Herman had started a wholesale wine business after World War I, and their company became quite well known, and it prospered. It was successful in the 1920s. But it suffered from economic boycotts after the Nazis came to power, and I knew that the family business was forced to close as it lost customers, and our grandfather became seriously ill in 1938. But there was so much I did not know. My internet research, I researched this in English, and there was almost no information I could find. And it was as if our grandfather's world had vanished, had disappeared, decimated, destroyed in the Shoah. So I decided to explore this. And I turned to the sources that I had. Our father, Ernest Landy, born Ernest Levy, had typed up a report about the family business when he was still alive. And I would like to dedicate this presentation to our father, because without his recollections and the beautiful visual records that he had kept, this story would have disappeared, like so many stories disappear in history if they're not recorded and carefully preserved. And you can imagine these documents, the records that we have, were carried across the ocean in 1937, 1938, during tragic years, 1939, and that's why we have them today. So thank you to our father. He also kept old postcards and photographs, and that's a precious record for us. This is the Levy family on vacation during the summer in your beautiful Schwarzwald, the Black Forest. It was their favorite time of the year together. You can see our father in the middle. He actually set up the picture himself, a self-timer. He was maybe 14, and then he ran into the picture so he could be included. And I talked to our wonderful Aunt Sue there, and her 3 children are with us today. She was the last living member of our family who had memories of the Nazi era, who I could talk to. Our family were middle-class Reform Jews, and they were members of Landau's beautiful, beautiful synagogue, which of course was burnt down. Heinrich sat on the council of the synagogue, and Sue, young Sue, sang in the choir. This is our grandfather, Heinrich, on his honeymoon in Switzerland with his bride, Erna, who was from nearby Lustad. She grew up in the house in front of which we did this very precious Stolperstein ceremony with the Emnet family that is here, and we thank them again last Saturday. This is their wedding menu in Lustad from June of 1914. It was a happy time for them, and then, of course, that happy world was soon shattered with the outbreak of World War I. Just a little side story, our brother Michael and I had an English mother. Our English grandfather was on the Belgian front in the trenches, and he was fighting our German grandfather Heinrich, who was on the German side as a translator and a mail censor. So our two grandfathers were opposed in World War I, and that's why the European Union means so much also to our family, that Europeans, at least here in the west of Europe, are not killing one another anymore. Our family, like I think all German Jewish families, were patriotic Germans. They were very loyal to the homeland. They loved German culture. They felt completely German. Heinrich and his brother Hermann Levy opened their wholesale wine business in Landau shortly after Germany's defeat in World War I. And it's not very far from here. Now it's called Neustader Straße. The name of the street changed many times with the political changes. The prices were low after World War I. They had no money, but because the prices were low, they could afford to buy this property, which had 2 apartments, it had office space, it had cellars where they could store and age their wine, and it had a link to the railway in the back, which we have learned also with Peter Dam, who is here, how important the rail link was for the wine merchants of Landau. That's our father and aunt standing in one of the company's wine barrels on the property. The family firm was best known as suppliers of quality white table wines, but they also had refined high quality Rieslings from the northern Pfalz. Half of their wines were sold in bulk, and the rest was sold in bottles. Our father and our aunt remember the grape harvest. I'm sorry, with all this rain, I think about the harvesters who have been harvesting the grapes in the Palatinate this past month, and I wish they had more sunshine. Our father and our aunt remembered the grape harvest as the busiest and most colorful time of the year. And Sue, our aunt, remembered the horse-drawn wagons coming into their courtyard, laden full of grapes. The pressed grapes were then put in barrels and left to ferment in a large underground cellar. And the cellar contained a variety of wines, and clients could order special blends. Our father remembered special instruments used to measure the sugar content of the wine. There were stories of people going to jail in Landau for misrepresenting their wine. And our father wrote, "It was always bad when a case like this was discovered because it risked giving the town and the region a bad name. But our family firm was always above reproach. We were an honest businessman, and we were proud of it." I do have to say that I am not a professional historian, and will be very impressed to hear the words of the professionals, the historians, the professors who will come. So please excuse me if I make any historical comments that are not accurate by your findings, and please come to me afterwards to increase my and our family's knowledge of this. After Hitler came to power, as you know, the many Jewish wine merchants in Germany and the Palatinate faced economic boycotts and growing exclusion from German society. Wine fraud, as you also know, was an ongoing industry challenge. And anti-Semitism, as Monica Furr has so eloquently said, has come in and out of German history for many centuries. In 1884, Germany's largest wine publication published a piece claiming to identify the greatest threat to German vintners. Do you think it was fungi or natural disasters or vine diseases? No. Rather, I quote, the biggest threat was the two-legged pest, the winemaker without grapes. This Jewish enemy practiced his trade in the darkness of a cellar or laboratory, threatening the livelihood of hard-working, honest German winemakers. In 1933, as you know, the farming sector, including viticulture, was brought under Nazi party control within a new powerful organization, which I will mispronounce, the Reichsnaststand. The local party encouraged our grandfather's employees to join, but if they did, they could not work for a Jew. And our aunt, when I spoke to her, said, and she recorded an interview, she said, our grandfather was always anxious, worried about the loyalty of his employees during those years. And she remembered there was always this fear, this uncertainty at home. And our father remembered the Levy brothers trying to add another label to their business, which had closed, called Hermann Lehr. And he wrote, the people who bought the wine knew very well where it came from, but maybe they preferred having bottles on their shelves with a non-Jewish sounding name. 1938 was a terrible turning point for the Jews of Germany and for our family. The brothers realized they had no choice but to sell their business. And soon after pogrom night, our grandfather Heinrich died of colon cancer in Frankfurt's Jewish hospital. And the family property was sold at a steep loss, making almost no money. In May of 1939, our grandmother Erna, who was now a widow, was among the passengers with other family members who were fleeing Nazi Germany on a famous liner, ocean liner, called the St. Louis. That's her with the dark hair clutching her bag. Our grandmother was important to all of us, and she's the one who passed down our German Jewish cooking traditions. The refugees on this ship, which became famous, were refused entry to Cuba, to the US, and to Canada, and the ship was forced to return to Europe. This was just a few months before the outbreak of World War II. And our family was extremely lucky. They were able to disembark to land in England, but the other passengers ended up in Belgium, in France, in Holland, and many did not survive the war. So our grandmother Erna, our father Ernest, and our Aunt Sue, they fled to America where Heinrich, our grandfather, had relatives. But our father could not get visas for his grandparents, Jacob and Mina Weil, and they were in hiding in Nazi-occupied Amsterdam. Mina was discovered, she was deported, and she was murdered in Auschwitz. And that has cast a shadow on our family heritage. So it was symbolically extremely important for us to have the sponsorship of the Emnet family, to place Stolpersteins, to return our great-grandparents to the soil in front of their last home in Lustad. And we were very grateful. They're the first Stolperstein in this town, and that the mayor of Landau and Lustad were there. So we are very lucky that the cooking tradition of our family survived. And so we grew up in Switzerland and in California eating Jewish and Palatinate cooking. We were also lucky we inherited a history written by our parents late in life, but the recipes were just little pieces of brown paper with little notes, and I thought, this will not survive in the 21st century, and the history will not be read by the young people. So I have to find a way to take it, to try to tell a story, and to work with my brother and my cousin who is here, who's an excellent cook, as well as a small winemaker on his own, to prepare a version of the history which you now see, Oma Mina's Käsekuchen, which can be preserved in the 21st century. I think of the book, as Dr. Pauli said, as a tribute to the women in the family. History is often the history of men, and in this case, in a way, the women are the heroines of preserving the traditions and passing them down. And we're so grateful to the Society, to Mr. Knecht, for putting out a German version of our book, and we are excited and touched that it is having some success. So, in conclusion, really, our grandfather Heinrich's winemaking has touched all of us in one way or another. When we visited the Lustad Jewish cemetery where our ancestors are buried, beautiful cemetery, I was amazed to see a number of the headstones had grapes on them because, of course, as Monica Furr said, or I think it was you, that wine is in the DNA of the Palatinate. And so I'm sure that when I am in a vineyard, I am so happy. A vineyard anywhere is a source of joy for me. I think it's because of my grandfather. And of course, our cousin David is also carrying on the winemaking on a small scale at his family property north of San Francisco. Today is a special honor for our family. It's our first opportunity to learn firsthand about the history and culture which shaped our grandfather's world. And it's the first time we feel, as his descendants, that his dignity, I say that again, his dignity and honesty as a wine professional is being restored in Germany for the first time by all of you. Please take advantage of this extraordinary opportunity to preserve the knowledge that will come to light today and popularize it, make it accessible in the Palatinate and beyond. It would be a great gift to your beautiful region and a gift to our family. Thank you very much.
Ja, liebe Frau Landy.
Ms. Landy, thank you. Thank you for that insight into the family history. It touched me when I saw the book for the first time, and I helped translate the book. What touched me was that all of a sudden, things that you learned in history, old things from the past, became alive again when you go to the house in Neustadter Straße. As an example, all of a sudden I realized there were people living there and their descendants are alive today and we can see them and talk to them. And I feel that this is tangible history, the history that comes close, very close. And that's what we want to try to do today in our symposium. I'll introduce our first speaker, Frau Christine Kolanga. She is the head of the City Archive. Since 2013, she studied history at the University of Freiburg. And after her studies, she worked in a few archives, federal archives, military archives, the archive of the University of Freiburg. So she is a well-versed archive expert, and then she came to Landau and worked in the archive. And since 2013, she has been the head of the department. And if you read the newspaper here in Palatinate, you know that she helped to exemplify the history of Landau. And then I read the articles, and they were beautiful. And she will be the first presenter and give an overview of the history of Jews in Landau and the Jewish history of Landau. You have the floor. Thank you. For 750 years, since the granting of town charter in 1274 by King Rudolf of Habsburg, Landau also had a Jewish community. Ladies and gentlemen, you might feel it. We will take a fast overview of the history of Landau. And Bernhard, I hope I will make the time. I have 25 minutes and I hope I can stick to the time. Naya Nase and his wife Selkind are the first known Jews in Landau. They are mentioned in a document dating 1329. It is difficult to say how large the congregation here might have been. As in many places, it may have been a small Jewish settlement, a few Jewish families in the shadow of the large Schum towns on the Rhine River. The king and the small imperial city acted as the supreme patrons of the Jews. By the so-called servitude, they were also granted other rights, the right to be admitted to a town, freedom of economic activities, and the freedom to practice their religion. On the one hand, this meant legal protection, but also dependence on the respective patron. In the following centuries, this system of protection became a coveted object of financial policy between the emperor, sovereigns, and the imperial cities. With the pledging of the young town of Landau to the Bishop of Speyer, just 50 years after the town charter was granted, the Jews of Landau were now also bound to the episcopal lord of the town and required to provide financial services. The release from this pledge in 1511 could only be accomplished by the admission of 10 par Jews. 10 par Jews who had to pay 300 guilders a year in protection money and thus contribute to the redemption of the remaining shield. You see dependence as a financial object. And depending on the financial need, Jews were either allowed to live in the work in the city or expelled from the city walls. In 1309 was the first mention of a Judengasse in Landau. Since the 16th century, from the 16th to the 19th century, there were 2 Judengassen in Landau. The Great Judengasse was the street in the center of the town, renamed Theater Street in 1893 at the center of the city, and the so-called Small Judengasse is today's Kugelgarten Street between König Street and Kron Street. However, there is no evidence of a ghetto-like character to these 2 streets. Martha Saalfeld, born in Landau, she's a writer and a poet. She wrote about her biographical experience in the street in her novel, Die Judengasse, published in 1965, and I quote accordingly, "It was the most interesting alleyway in the whole city for me. It was a bit wider than you'd expect for an alleyway. On one side, there were handsome townhouses whose owners had their gardens and summer homes in front of the old town gate. On the other side, the descendants of former ghetto inhabitants lived in low and sometimes tiny houses. They had their junk and antique stores here filled with enchanting things, with masked costumes, inlaid game tables, and old porcelain. The people in the small houses all seemed depressed to me, and as if they were carrying an invisible burden together. Residence regulations, economic restrictions, and tax payments characterized the life of Landau's Jews from the 15th century well into the 18th century. They didn't live together, however, they were dependent on each other and otherwise avoided each other. The Jews of Landau lived for themselves in their religious yearly routine, and they tried to make a living in a few permitted professions and hoped to be allowed to live in the city for a longer period of time. The non-Jewish population, on the other hand, kept a close eye on the many regulations that structured the life of the Jewish community and meticulously monitored economic activities in particular. The Jews, excluded from guild trades, agriculture, and subject to market regulations, were often only left with petty trading or money lending, a service that was bound to provoke constant conflict. Demands from the townspeople for the expulsion of Jews and the debt relief they hoped this would bring kept the town council busy for centuries. In 1541, the town council decided on a dress code for the Jewish population. The Jews of Landau were now to be recognized by their clothing. Each Jew was supposed to wear a small ring, as large as a pane in the window on front of the left breast. This was a small round window. The men in Landau now had to wear the so-called Jewish hat, a mostly yellow hat with a high spherical tips, and the Jewish women had to wear a blue striped veil over their hair. This is a contemporary depiction of St. Catherine's Chapel. The frescoes, probably from the early days of the Benjamin Chapel, show the Passion of Christ in the choir room in the openly anti-Judaic depiction of the Jews as alleged murderers of Christ in their prescribed costumes. There were lots of traditions, and religious urban life was strongly characterized by these traditions. The Jews had to wear certain clothes regardless of where they lived. The synagogue and house of prayer, the mikvah, the school, and the private sphere of the family were the central coordinates of Jewish community life. However, even in Landau, the Jewish community was not autonomous in the selection of functionaries, who at least had to be confirmed by the town council. In 1520, for example, Meger Keim had to be confirmed as school knocker by the Landau town council. His task was to call the faithful to worship by banging on the shutters of their houses with a hammer. In the early modern period, contacts and relations with the non-Jewish world were regularly by so-called Judenvögte, their Jewish Breilefs, who were elected and paid by the town council. Its task was to monitor business matters and settle legal disputes. After the 30-Year War, France received the bailiwick over the Alsatian imperial cities, including Landau. France derived property rights from those protective and umbrella rights and incorporated the imperial cities into the French state. Now began Landau's French period, which did not end until 1815. That was 130 years later. The construction of a French fortress of Landau between 1688 and 1691 and the associated economic upswing was not without significance for the Jewish population. Trading Jews in particular now increasingly found their way into the city to supply the army of around 15,000 workers. However, this was not without opposition from local traders. The Landau businessmen pressed for a restriction on Jews, and they demanded that all Jews should be chased out of the city, a demand that was not heard by the governor of the city. Liberty, equality, fraternity, slogans of the Great Revolution, also applied to French Jews. On January 28 in 1791, a decree of the French National Assembly abolished all special regulations and now expressly confirmed full human and civil rights for Jews. The decree, which now also applied to Landau, France, was the first legally established Jewish emancipation in Europe. In the French garrison town of Landau, the ideas of the French Revolution fell on fertile ground. The official founding meeting of the Jacobin Club took place in 1791. By the time it was dissolved, it had over 300 members, including 8 honorary members of the Jewish community, who were citoyens actifs, and they were able to raise a certain amount of tax. However, the newly won freedom was not to last long. In 1808, Napoleon revoked Jewish emancipation, in particular the right to trade and freedom of movement. This applied in particular to the Décret infâme, which prohibited all credit transactions of the Jews, and they were placed under state supervision. Their trading activities were to be made dependent on the prior issue of a permit, which could be used to check the morality of the petitioner. It was felt that the Jews first had to adapt to German culture and prove themselves to a higher moral maturity. And this morality patent was valid well into the 19th century, even in our city. At the same time, the Jews were to modernize their names and use fixed first and last names in order to force their civic improvement. Landau was open to the idea. Numerous Landau Jews, who had previously only added their father's name to their own, now often chose even French names. Gombert Lyon changed his name to Louis Morand. Abraham Samuel became Abraham Samuel Dreyfus, and his wife changed her name from Gudle to Sarah, and their daughter changed her name from Moyle to the more refined Manette. Just as in the French Revolution, the emancipation of the Jews in the 1848 revolution was generally linked to the demands for a separation of church and state, freedom of conscience, equality before law, and the emancipation of people. And the Napoleon decrees were also a thorn in the side of freedom-loving non-Jews. This is also reflected in the address from the citizens of Landau to the Palatinate. And I quote, "The abolition of the Jewish decree and the full rights of the Israelites was demanded." In this revolution, too, the participation of the Landau Jews in the national liberal uprising was a matter of course. People were members of groups, they discussed, they got involved, and celebrated the consecration of the vigilant flag with the people of Landau. In addition to the Catholic and Protestant clergymen, District Rabbi Elias Grünebaum also gave a fiery speech, accompanied by cheers. However, revolutionary movements of 48-49 were crushed. Although the reaction of the following decade could no longer stop the process of social emancipation, but it did slow it down considerably. It was not until the imperial legislation in 1871, after the unification of Germany, that a uniform legal framework was created. In the meantime, large Jewish communities had established themselves in the southern Palatinate. This is a photograph from Ingenheim, where 30% of the population was Jewish, and the Jew Bernard Rose was even to become the mayor from 1869 to 1884. You see the synagogue of Ingenheim on the photo. Essingen had a Jewish population of 19% and Albersweiler 12%. For centuries, the prohibitions imposed on non-Jews meant that Jews were excluded from farming and the guild trades. In the Palatinate, too, this meant that Jewish employment was concentrated in the commercial professions. There were many Jewish traders, especially among cattle, wine, and tobacco. Otherwise, there was a high proportion of small traders, butchers, old and second-hand goods dealers, and peddlers. Here, too, the vast majority of them lived in rather modest circumstances. Nevertheless, even though many Jews were now recognized and respected as business partners, as neighbors, and as politicians, the folklorist and contemporary Heinrich Wilhelm Riehl put it in the Southern Palatinate, and I quote, "The evidence of old contempt for Jews in the vernacular and common idioms was still alive in all its glory." End of quote. The rapprochement of Jews with the intellectual, social, economic, and political structure of non-Jewish bourgeois society continued. Yet anti-Judaic resentment persisted in people's minds. It was precisely at the end of the 19th century, when industrialization revealed its crisis-ridden character, the traditional anti-Judaism turned into political anti-Semitism, which became a fashionable political topic in the German Empire. Assimilation and anti-Semitism formed the two poles between which the relationship between Jewish and non-Jewish Germans in the German Empire moved. You see a picture of Reiterstraße towards the east, and you see the synagogue. On the one hand, there was the willingness of the Jewish population to adopt the dominant bourgeois culture and even to convert to the religion. On the other hand, there was marginalization and defamation of all Jews, which had been charged with nationalist ideas since the 1870s at the latest. Finally, after almost 200 years of being surrounded by walls, the Landau fortress was dismantled. The people of Landau were relieved. After decades of fighting with the Bavarian authorities, there was now a new era of urban development. The ramparts fell and were replaced by wide ring roads. Many people from the surrounding southern Palatinate communities, but also from other Bavarian regions, now sought their fortune in the up-and-coming small town. At the turn of the 19th and 20th century, Landau did not undergo industrialization as other Palatinate cities, such as Pirmasens, Kaiserslautern, or even Ludwigshafen. Landau continued to develop as a garrison location and administrative town, as a commercial center and school center in the southern Palatinate. Within 40 years, the population had more than doubled. These are the numbers from 1871 till 1910. That was a development that we can hardly imagine today. However, also the proportion of the Jewish population increased. From 1880 to 1900, the Jewish community grew from 433 to 821. There had never been more Jewish citizens in the town. The number had doubled within 20 years. However, the proportion of the Jewish population in the total population had remained almost the same. This process intensified during the Weimar period. From 1925 to 1932, before the NS regime, the Jewish population fell from just under 5% to only 3.6%, from 727 to 596 people. The migration of the Jews from the southern Palatinate took place in 3 stages. In the last decades of the 19th century, the Jewish population of the rural village communities increasingly moved to small towns in the region. Landau was particularly appealing. The 20 to 40 age group in particular was characterized by a high level of mobility. The children of that generation also reinforced this trend from village to city by frequently moving to larger cities or even emigrating from Germany altogether. In addition, there was a decline in the birth rate, so that the Jewish population in the German Reich fell significantly by 1933. As the town became less fortified, Landau developed into the main staple of Palatinate wine. There was mainly the wholesale trade in cheap consumer and blended wines in particular. In 1902, there were 79 wine shops in Landau, 60% of which were Jewish-owned. This was an economic career of Southern Palatinate Jews. However, it only lasted 1 generation, from the founding of the company to the end, dictated by the NS. What is remarkable is that within just a few years, an entire industry had migrated to Landau, and Jewish family businesses moved to Landau, especially from the neighboring communities in the Southern Palatinate. This did not remain without consequences for the cityscape. In Ostring, the eastern part of the Nordring, and the Marine Ring, in particular a home to Jewish building projects, which were generally large residential properties with businesses and storage premises. The construction of the industrial track to optimize transport routes, an initiative of local wine merchants, was another measure that consolidated the city's reputation as a wine trading metropolis. First of all, they built a new synagogue. Since 1794, they only had a synagogue room in a private house in Gymnasiumstraße. The house still exists today, on the other side of the gymnasium. Since the 1840s, people hoped that they could build a new synagogue. However, there was no space available. After the city became less fortified, there was a solution. The city granted a plot of land to the Jewish community in the south of the town. 140 years ago, in 1884, after 2 years of construction, the synagogue was inaugurated with great participation from the people of Landau. The editor of Landau newspaper reported that hardly a house appeared without a flag and decoration, and that crowds of people stood in the streets. Nevertheless, just 1 day later, several windows of the new synagogue were smashed. The Landau Jewish residents were Reformed Judaism. The core of this reform movement was the integration and assimilation of Jews into non-Jewish society as equals among equals, and the rejection of Orthodox ideas. For example, songs and prayers were no longer sung and spoken in Hebrew, but rather in German. The question of the degree of assimilation of the Landau Jews at the beginning of the century was easy to answer. The Jews of Landau were still particularly active in the commercial and merchant professions: wine, tobacco, textile, shoe, and food merchants. 30% of Landau's Jews worked in these trades. There were still significant differences in income. However, the Jewish standard of living had risen considerably compared to the 19th century. The Jews of Landau were not only business partners and neighbors, but often party friends, linked by memberships in associations with a wide range of objectives. They were members of trade associations, celebrated sporting and cultural events, and the Jewish women were involved in social and charitable organizations. People shared experience. The First World War was a collective experience in trenches, taking on special significance. There were numerous experiences, and the majority of Landau's Jews felt as German citizens of Jewish faith. The younger generation in particular grew up in the firm belief that they were no different from non-Jewish children. They were students at the humanistic grammar school, at the secondary school for girls, or at the Institute of the English Fräuleins. They shared interests and activities of their non-Jewish friends, and religious affiliation hardly played a role. Nevertheless, prejudices and opinions cultivated over the centuries were still present. Modern anti-Semitism was socially acceptable. Envy, resentment, and jealousy of the apparent economic and cultural achievements made it difficult to get along, especially in economically difficult times, such as the end of the Weimar Republic. There's hardly any other explanation for the fact that the anti-Jewish actions were tolerated and supported by the majority of Landau residents without any protest at the beginning of the NS regime. Ladies and gentlemen, even though the Jewish community lived as a minority and as a marginalized group within the city walls for many centuries, it was still part of the city's society and thus belongs to our collective identity. And we commemorate this identity 750 years. In this respect, the Holocaust is also a loss of Landau identity. We too have lost a part of our history and a part of our traditions irrevocably. It is good that we remember this today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for this very informative presentation that clearly shows the importance of and the connection of Jewish and Landau history. So when we prepared the symposium, we thought about how to make this possible, that we show the connection between the culture and history of Landau and the Jewish culture and Jewish life in Landau. And the whole topic of wine trading leads us to the question of the role of wine trading when it comes to the culture and the people who live here, the life of people who live here. culture means the way or defines the way people live in a certain region. And this is part of the Palatinate DNA. We've already heard this a couple of times before. So we thought that after the introduction into Jewish history of our city, we want to give you a second introduction into what characterizes or what means wine culture in the Palatinate. And I think we got a speaker here today who really lives this. She asked me not to say this, but I'm going to say it again. Well, this year we've got a wine queen elected from the Palatinate in 2014. This was the last time when this happened, and it was Janina Huhn, today Janina Huber, and she was the wine princess, wine queen back then in 2014. She was a wine ambassador, and she has a clear opinion on that, on Palatinate wine culture. So Janina Huber studied Latin philosophy and history in Freiburg. She wrote her thesis on Platon and wine culture. And she has become very active in the field of training and further education in wine history. So we are very happy to have you here. Very warm welcome, Janina Huber. Great. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm so happy to be able to be here today to give a presentation. When Mr. Scholten asked me, I thought, well, it's quite a while since I studied history, but so I am standing here in front of you as a wine expert and as an ambassador for the wine-growing region of the Palatinate. And so it's a bit of a contrast to your presentation. I would like to give you an introduction on wine growing in the Palatinate, and I would like to split my presentation in two parts. First of all, we want to talk about the Palatinate wine culture and how it emerged, and we were going to take a look into the history. That's very important. The second part is an introduction to what's important for us in the wine industry of today. What are we doing? What characterizes wine from the Palatinate? What makes it so unique? So wine culture of the Palatinate, history and past is the title of my presentation. And I also wrote down that wine culture, as we have it today, has existed since 2021 and has been in close connection with the SCHUM cities, who have been recognized since 2021. It's been part of the immaterial, intangible cultural heritage as part of the German wine culture in Germany. And we are very happy about this. And it shows that it's about much more than just a part of German industry. It's an important part of the industry, of course. We've got a wine grower here today. It is also about preserving cultural heritage and also a product that's very important and is an important part of the identity of wine-growing regions, wine-growing areas. Let's start with a geographic overview. What is the wine-growing area of the Palatinate? Let's start at the French border in the south, and then we go up to the Zellertal, where we meet Rheinhessen, which is the biggest wine-growing area of Germany. I brought you some figures to start off my presentation to give you a dimension of the Palatinate today. We've got 23,800 hectares of wine growings, of vineyards. So we are the second largest area in Germany. We've got 100,000 hectares in Germany in total. So 1/4 of the German wine is produced in the Palatinate. Internationally speaking, Bordeaux, as a wine-growing region, has more than 100,000 hectares, a bit of 100,000 hectares, but it's much bigger and much more known than Palatinate. So we are not that small. That's all I want to say. So we produce quite a lot here in the Palatinate. The region in total includes 1.4 million inhabitants, but it also has a lot of forests and also vegetable growing areas. In Ludwigshafen, we have a lot of chemical industry. and about 15,000 people live off wine growing, of those 1.4 million. So, and many of them are seasonal workers. This also includes seasonal workers, because without them it wouldn't be possible here as well. It was great that you emphasized that. So wine is an important economic product, and it also has an important effect on tourism in the region, so it's closely linked. So what do we produce here? I tried to list that. I had to switch presentation, but I'm going to add some things. What do we produce here? 57% are dry wines. And in Germany, we produce 50%. We do 57%. All of Germany does 50% because we like that. We like dry wine. Dry wine is very popular right now, and so the Palatinate style is a very modern one. We've got 350 different sites, different areas that are listed. I'm going to go into detail. What does that mean? What is a vineyard site? What does that mean? Because it's always closely connected to the history and culture of the region. And what's also important for us and good for us, we produce 90% of wine that is sold under GU Palatinate. This is a label. You might know this from other wines. There are heritage seals within the European Union. So this is a protected seal, a protected brand, and it is the protected heritage. And this speaks for a higher quality of the wine because we have to comply with stricter rules. We are at 90%, so this is a very good figure for us in the Palatinate. I'm going to jump over the next slide so we can get to the actual topic. So who is producing the wine? We've got more than 1,000 vineyards, wine estates with more than 12,000 hectares. So not those big, not that big companies. So it's exciting times ahead for the wine industry. The figure will decline in the next years to come. This is something that is for sure. But that is the current status. We've got. We've got cooperatives, 11 of them. They are playing a very important role. We produce mainly white wines. I already mentioned that before. And I already had a look at the maps that you showed us, and you saw it was white wines. Many of them were white wines. And the Palatinate is also famous for red and rosé wines, one of the most important wine growing areas for red and rosé wines as well here in Germany. So I'm going to jump that slide because it's not only about the bare figures if we want to talk about wine culture. We also have to have a look at other dimensions. So let me have a look at the historic roots of viticulture in the Palatinate. And I'm going to go through the centuries quickly. I can't go into detail, unfortunately, but I'm going to mention some of the highlights to give you a feeling of how deeply rooted viticulture is in the Palatinate. So let me start from the beginning with the Romans who brought wine growing to this area. We had Celtic settlements before, but there is no evidence for the Romans. We saw first archaeological findings. And the Drusus and Tiberius, we had the Crusades of Drusus and Tiberius, and we had the first archaeological findings. So Rome actually did not want the conquered areas to produce wine. It was actually forbidden, and only in 280 under Emperor Probus, the people from the Mosel region know this as well. This was when wine growing was officially allowed. But they did it before, I think, because we found a Roman vineyard in Weilberg near Ungstein, close to Bad Dürkheim. This is what you can see here on the picture. It's an old press, and we assume that wine was grown here before and was produced here before for the Roman soldiers. And this is a great evidence for the German wine growing. This is the this is probably the oldest liquid wine bottle that can be found in the Historic Museum in Speyer, and that dates back to the early 4th century. We found this in a grave, and since then it's kept in the museum. We know that Romans drank wine. I don't know whether this was an Italian wine or wine from the Palatinate. It's hard to tell right now. This is a reconstruction of the German wine estate of that Roman villa that we found, and you see the vineyard around, so it's a very close connection. When the Romans left, the monasteries supported wine growing. It was the Weissenburg monastery, and this was the central monastery for the region, and we know that in 753 the monastery Johannitergut in Neustadt, which is a state wine estate, was given to the Palatinate. So we can assume that this estate winery in Neustadt is probably the oldest winery in the Palatinate, dating back to the 8th century. And that was also the time when we found the first evidence for wine growing in the villages and cities of the Palatinate. So there was the first German Wine Act, which was established under Charlemagne. So people thought a lot about the quality of their wines. They said, well, don't use your feet to stamp to press the wine. So we are still doing this today. So this didn't work out. So some of the rules who have been implemented for quality reasons have not been complied with. But in general, they try to improve constantly try to improve the quality of the wine. And because wine was a high quality product that they wanted to protect, this is why they introduced a law on that as well. So Middle Ages. We had the salience in the Palatinate, and this was a good time for wine growing. We had an area that was 3 times as big as the wine growing area that we have today. We expanded all the way to Kaiserslautern. The area was much bigger, and from 1500 and 1600 on, we had an ice time, a small ice time, so the climate has changed, and this is why the wine growing area was reduced. There were also many false wines on the market, so this is why people did not believe in wine anymore as a high quality product. So reduction of the wine growing area, that was characteristic for the Middle Ages. So this is a picture of the probably oldest vineyard in the world. So it's hard to say whether this is true because we don't know what's going on in China, but this is a very, very old vineyard with vines that are 400 years old, and they still produce wine, a Gewürztraminer. So it still exists. Difficult times for Germany and also for the Palatinate. Reformation in 16th century. Many of the monasteries who supported wine growing were lost. We had the 30 years of war. And so we are not going to talk about what happened here in Landau because properties changed and the population was replaced completely. So it's clear that during these times it was difficult to maintain wine growing with a certain continuity as it would have been necessary. So wine growing was still an important part of the industry, of the economy, but when I started dealing with this topic last year for the Palatinate, it was more difficult than for other wine growing areas to take an outstanding role in terms of quality. So if you think about Rheingau as a wine growing region, this is a very popular region, and we got Kloster Eberbach, Schloss Johannesberg. So those were the important wine growing regions that were globally known for high quality wines. And in the Palatinate, we tried to survive, if you want to put it like that, because there was a lot of political unrest here in the region. So why is wine from the Palatinate still different in terms of its image? Why are other wine growing areas a bit more popular, a bit more outstanding? So let me try to explain that. History continued, and from the perspective of wine growing, the French time was very beneficial for us. So at that time, we were able to produce more high-quality wines because of the secularization. More wine estates were privatized, and you see an important figure, Andreas Jordan, very important figure for wine growing in the Palatinate. He was one of the founding fathers around the time of the Napoleonic times. This is when he lived. And when secularization took place, he came up with ideas for high-quality wines. He studied in Rheingau at the big wine estates there, and with this model on his mind, he came back and started to grow Riesling. pure varieties. They did not do that before in the Palatinate, so he was one of the first who sold wine in bottles in the Palatinate. Before they only sold it in barrels, so he was one of the first to sell wine in bottles here in the Palatinate. Palatinate became Bavarian with the Vienna Congress. You all know that, obviously, and for the side effects were not as favorable for the people in the Palatinate. But from the wine growing perspective, there was one big advantage of the Bavarian rule. In 1828, a soil classification was carried out in the Palatinate. And this is a treasure that we still can turn to today when we want to define the good wine growing areas, the wine growing sites. Where can we produce high quality and expensive wine? You might know the Forsterkirchenstück, which was one of the highest class sites back then and was already classified in 1829. In the Rheingau, classifications like that took place much later, so we were leading here because of the Bavarian rule. What the people from the Palatinate did not like were the high tariffs and political restrictions that came with the Bavarian rule. Everybody knows the date, Hambacher Fest, 1832. This was the result of this development. For viticulture, the Hambacher Fest, due to one historic event, was very important, and I want to mention it today because we've got a very old champagne culture, sparkling wine culture here in the Palatinate. We've got the second oldest sparkling wine estate in Germany. This is located in Bad Dürkheim. Why is that? Because Johannes Fitz was participated in the Hambacher Fest. He was a vintner and suffered from the restrictions, and after this he went to exile because of political persecution. He came to the Champagne and learned how to produce champagne and sparkling wine. So you see all the regions, all the wine-growing regions are closely linked to each other in some way. The second half of the 19th century was characterized by ups and downs, because we had all those diseases, as you can see here, and we've got many areas were destroyed. Fungi were threatening the harvest, and many innovations and research institutions were found. 1899, foundation of our research institution in Neustadt, today's DLR, and also a university today where you can study viticulture today. So Palatinate, besides the Rheingau region, is also an important, also has an important university for viticulture in Germany. This is what we are proud of. Next slide, Mr. Krieger. Very hard for me because I know you are an expert in that field and you are going to go into detail about that. But the time between the world wars and also the time of the National Socialists, a lot happened at that time. Difficult times for all of us in terms of economics and also for wine. Well, after World War I, soldiers ordered a lot of wine, and this increased the prices. But afterwards, normal society could not afford wine anymore. And this is how we ended up in economic difficulties. And this led to the fact that National Socialists supported wine propaganda. 1938, I'm not going to go into detail here. Election of the first wine queen, wine princess. National Socialists have done a lot here, and they really try to support the propaganda around the whole topic of wine. We're going to hear more about that from in your presentation. The foundation of the Deutsche Weinstraße, and so on and so forth. And what also brings us together here, 1938, where the ban on Jewish wine merchants. This is what a vineyard looked like that before. I usually show this to wine traders, wine merchants, and not to historians. But this shows clearly how hard wine growing was back then. The people are bigger than the wines, as you can see, so they had to bend down a lot. There was no automation, so everything was done manually. And just to give you a right impression, 2,500 working hours per hectare were necessary back then. Today, with automation, we are down to 250, but not in the Mosel. This is something difficult, but in the Palatinate, this works pretty well. After World War II, 1949, the first narrow track tractor was invented. This was a tractor that could handle the narrow wine rows. And so this is a Krieger brand. One of the first tractors was invented here in the Palatinate. So we've been very innovative. There was a new wine law increasing the quality of our wines in the 80s. They were the first people who produced organic wine in the Palatinate. So we have always been leading here in this area. But there was a time when a lot of the Palatinate wine was, a large part of the Palatinate wine was sold in barrels. So the next thing that happened was the glycol scandal in 1985, which affected winemakers from Austria and the Palatinate. But there was a pressure to innovate again, and as you can see in the statistics, no sweet wine was sold after at the market anymore. So the wines were no longer sweetened, and this was a good development towards dry wines here in the Palatinate, which was also very favorable for us. Southern Palatinate region, 1993, Rhine-Pfalz turned into the Pfalz region in the Palatinate region, and Rhine-Palatinate turned into Palatinate, so we became independent, and our slogan was born, Cheers the Palatinate, zum Wohl die Pfalz. So it stands not only for the wine industry, but for the whole culture and way of life that we've got here in the Palatinate. The 2000s, I am trying to keep it short, so we've got more international varieties. We have become more international in the wine industry in general, international cooperation, some challenges ahead due to climate change. Of course, we see that professional standards have increased. Most of the wine growers are studying viticulture today or have studied viticulture today. Organic wine growing has increased a lot. So that was it, my quick historic overview. I have to keep an eye on the time because I think I'm already running out of time, but I just wanted to give you a rough overview about the development of wine growing in the Palatinate. So a long history is not enough to understand this cultural product. So let me talk about a topic which is one of my favorite topics. I could keep on talking for hours about that topic. I'm trying to do it in 5 to 10 minutes. What is characteristic for wine from the Palatinate? Because that is important if you want to understand wine from the Palatinate. We are talking about terroir. So the following section deals with the natural factors. Let me try to explain it. Terroir. It is about the soil types, and this is what you can find on the bottles as well, the type of soil, whether it's limestone. But terroir is actually much more than that. It is an interaction of climatic conditions, the soil, and also the influence of human beings. Without human beings, this is just not possible. And this triangle is what characterizes the wine-growing regions and makes them very unique, each area very unique. Let's have a look at the climate in the Palatinate. We've got a cool continental climate in the Palatinate. It feels weird because in summer it's relatively warm. But given the international context, because we're competing with California and southern France, so it is relatively cool here in the Palatinate region. So we are continental because we have no ocean around the corner, and continental means that you can maintain the acid in the grapes, that you can form great aromas, and this is what characterizes our wine varieties, our style here in the Palatinate. We are one of the driest regions in Germany, and this year this is not going to be the case, but on average we are a relatively dry region, and this is what makes the Palatinate suitable for wine growing. There are some risks such as hail and frost, but this is not as relevant for our topic today. The Palatinate forest is an important factor. It is like it has an important influence on the climate because we've got humid air from the west, and this cools down and precipitation goes down over the forest, and this is why it is a very good region for wine growing. This is what the Romans already noticed, and this is why we kept growing wines here over the centuries, and why this has developed in a very positive way here over the centuries. So the Palatinate forest, very important, and you find very beautiful ruins of castles there as well. So this is a precipitation. This shows the precipitation. You see that we've got the largest part of the rain falls in the forest regions, and at the upper Rhine Valley region, it's relatively dry. And for all the people here from the southern Palatinate region, in the southern Palatinate region, they've got 100 millimeters more precipitation at the Mittelhart and northern Palatinate region. And so the southern Palatinate region is cooler, actually. You would think that it is hotter, but it's not, because the hard mountains are higher, and this is why we've got less precipitation in the north. You see it, and you can also taste it in the wines. That's great to see, that you can also taste those minor differences. A second part of the so-called terroir, sorry, I have to speed up my presentation a little bit, is the soil. And in the Palatinate, we've got a very, very, very special soil. We are located in the Upper Rhine Valley region. The Oberrheingraben started to emerge 15 million years ago, and it is still emerging. The African continent collided with our continent, and so a valley emerged, and at the shoulders of that ditch we've got very, very old soil types that emerged. And if you try Palatinate wines, every wine estate will tell you something about the soil type where we grew this wine. And it makes sense, because we've got a huge variety of different soil types and very small regions, very small areas, due to this geographic location and geographic characteristics that we find here. This is a big treasure for our vintners, for our wine growers, because the type of soil can influence the wine. And I would like to talk about this for half an hour, because the study results are contradictory, but we don't have time to go into detail here. If you want to learn more about limestone and the effect on the wines, and please talk to me or Christoph afterwards. We'd like to talk about that for hours. So this is a very exciting topic. What I want you to know today, this combination of protected climate due to the Palatinate forest, the diversity of soil types, that definitely has an influence on the wine. This makes the Palatinate a very unique wine growing area. But that's not all. I tried to list the effects again. Here you can see the popular sites, wine growing areas, and the soil types. So we've got the Schwarze Herrgott in Zelltal, which is limestone again. Then we've got Forster Pechstein, where we've got the basalt soil, which is very rare. You only find us in the Kaiserstuhl region in Germany. So you can see very, very different soil types. We've got granite, and we've got clay, and we've got sandstone, and this is what you can also find in the buildings. So very unique and characteristic soils, and this is a big treasure of our wine growing culture here in the Palatinate. This is what characterizes the terroir of the Palatinate, the climate, the soil. And to finish my presentation, let me focus on the human aspect. Human beings do a lot. They manage the vineyard, and this has an influence on the way the grapes grow and also on the taste of the wine, but they also decide the variety they want to grow. And this is one of the most important decisions, because without that, we wouldn't have any terroir. We've got more than 190 varieties in the Palatinate, and if I find old maps like that, if I see old menus like that, this always catches my eye. I wanted to see what they grew before, so it was more about the areas, more about the sites. Frauenmilch, and not about the varieties themselves. So you can see a change of the mentality. So Let me summarize that. If you want to understand the Palatinate, we can say that 25% of the wines we produce are Riesling wines. We are one of the biggest Riesling areas in the world. 25% come from the Burgunder family, from the Pinot family. So they come from France, and they are very important for us as well. And 50% is the rest. But this is where it gets complicated if I would go into detail here. So just Riesling and Pinots, Riesling and Pinots. So they are so important, and I would like to characterize them briefly. Palatinate, one of the biggest Riesling wine growing areas in the world. We already had them in the 1930s. And Riesling from Umstein was the most expensive one on that card that we saw before. So Riesling is one of the varieties in the world that produce the most expensive wines in the world. So the Rheingau region is also very famous for Riesling, and this is the origin of the Riesling, but we have produced Riesling in the Palatinate for centuries already. So let's have a look at the next one, the Pinot Noir. Here we already had the first one in the 14th century in the Palatinate forest, and this vineyard is already producing wine today, is still producing wine today. So we see long-standing Pinot Noir history and Riesling history in the Palatinate. I am not going into detail here because this is not our topic today, but to conclude my presentation, I would like to tell you more about what characterizes the Palatinate today. The beautiful landscape, of course, and the nonchalance of the people here. What do we mean with that? Well, wine is part of our DNA. We've already heard it a couple of times before. So this is our way of living. So I don't have to tell you about that because you come from the region, you've been here a couple of times. We celebrate our wine fests. So wine is not only sacred, it is part of our everyday life, but it is something that we really appreciate. So I think we think a lot about the quality of our wines. We like to tell the histories around wine. And this is what's very special about the people in the Palatinate. And combined with the cuisine and with our history and culture. But this is just another summary of what I tried to tell you in the short time that I had. I tried to tell you more about the wine culture in the Palatinate in the past and today. I hope that you learned today that we are a unique wine growing area due to the natural conditions here, that we are proud of our history. And it makes me even more proud that I've got the opportunity today to take a deep dive today into a very special aspect of that history. And I think we can't emphasize it too often. So thank you very much. And thank you very much for your attention.
Ja, liebe Frau Huber,
Thank you, Ms. Huber. Thank you very much for that introduction into Palatinate wine culture. There are a lot of things that I didn't know yet. If you want to know more, Palatinate has a podcast recorded with Ms. Huber, so you can listen to all the details. I can highly recommend that podcast if you're interested in the details. We talked about Palatinate wine culture, and as a little bit of a teaser, after the break, we'll hear something about the influence of wine on Jewish culture. But before that, we want to have a coffee break and a wine break. We have wine and coffee available downstairs, so you can taste what was just said. Riesling, Burgund, enjoy. And we'll meet back here at noon, at 12, in half an hour. Have a great coffee break.